How do you tell your story well? How many times in the world have we been in situations where we needed to tell a personal story or a story about our career? Maybe you were at a pitch meeting, or maybe you were at a presentation or another meeting at work, and you needed to tell your story well. I want to talk today about 3 keys for telling your story more effectively so you can make a compelling impact on the people who are listening. My name is Phil Cook, and I have a production company in Los Angeles called Cook Pictures. We're media consultants and coaches to leaders who are trying to tell their story and the story of their organization. We're also filmmakers, and so we're intimately involved in helping other people tell their story, whether it's through media, whether it's in live presentations, whether it's online, because I think storytelling is a really critical art that we as leaders need to master. Now, honestly, there's a lot out there on storytelling. I'm not going to add anything new to the world of storytelling. There are a million podcasts and books and films and all kind of videos on how to tell stories well. And I do believe they're important. I think we live in this incredibly cluttered world. Just the number of interruptions we face during the day, the hyper connectivity, the hyper competition. It's so hard to be unique. I actually wrote a book called Unique, Telling Your Story in the Age of Brands and Social Media. I'd encourage you to get it because it helps you figure out how to get your story out there in a much more compelling way. And I was on a podcast the other day, and I was talking to a friend who was interviewing me, and he said, before we close, tell us 3 important things about telling your story. And 3 weird ideas hit me, 3 unusual things that I'd never really heard before. And I thought it'd be worth sharing with you because telling our story is so important. There's a story about when I started college. I started as a piano major. I was a music major because I was a preacher's kid. Grew up in North Carolina. My dad was a pastor my whole life up to that point. I'd never really thought about being a preacher myself, but I didn't know what else to study in college. So I played the piano because that was kind of what we had to do as a preacher's kid. And I enrolled as a music major. But the funny thing was I also made movies. In high school, I had a group of friends, and we loved to get my dad's Super 8 movie camera and make short films. We did space movies and army movies and mafia movies, and we just loved doing it. And I never thought for a minute that's something I would ever want to do with my life. But I took the films to college thinking, maybe I'll find some guys in college that would like to make these. So I took my dad's camera with me. I took my little Super 8 movies. And when I was unpacking my freshman year, a couple of the films fell out of my suitcase. And a guy across the hall, Rod Carlson, I'll never forget, said, "Hey, I'm taking a film class. I can show you how to edit those movies." I didn't even know you could cut film in those days. So he took me down to the film department, and we were working on my movie one night. And it just so happened that the professor was there, the film professor. And he was working for a couple hours, and as he left, he stopped by our little table where we were cutting my movie, and he said, "I've been watching you work on your film here," and he said, "I've got students that have been taking film class for 3 years and still can't do this well." He said, "Would you mind if I showed your film in my class tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, if I could sit on the back row and I'd be curious to see what happens, would that be okay?" And he said, "Sure, come on." So the next day, I sat on the back row in the film class listening to him teach, and then he showed my movie. And when the movie was over, and trust me, it was nothing to scream about. It was no great work. This is the product of my high school years. But when he showed the movie in the class, they started talking about it. And this idea hit me like a bolt of lightning. I don't know if I've ever had such a crystal clear revelation in my life that if I could do something with a camera that makes people talk like this is what I'm supposed to do with my life. And I've never looked back. I changed my major that day to film and television, and I've literally never looked back. Now, I've told that story over and over and over again, because it was the defining story of my life. I'd be a piano player somewhere if I hadn't experienced that incident, that event. And I love to tell that story, and it's had a profound effect on young people trying to figure out what their career should be and where I should go. So I want to tell you 3 keys that when you come to a moment where you need to tell a story like that about your own life, and trust me, you may say, "Phil, my life's never amounted to much. I've never accomplished a great deal. Nobody's interested in my story." I'm going to tell you something. Somebody out there needs to hear your story. Whatever's happened to you, good or bad, somebody will get encouragement, somebody will be motivated, somebody will be really moved in a powerful way because of your story. So always think in terms of how I can tell my story more effectively. And it doesn't have to be your whole life story, by the way. Just an incident a situation, something that happened in your life that could really have an impact on people. But there's three critical keys that most people don't talk about when it comes to telling a story that I think are really, really important. So let me give you, number one, be self-aware. I've talked about being self-aware. I've written about it on my blog at philcook.com. But the truth is, being self-aware means I have an accurate appraisal of my gifts, my talents, my abilities, my behavior, my attitude, who I am. And unless you have that accurate understanding, that self-awareness about yourself, you're not going to tell a very powerful story because it's going to be off base. It's not going to be what other people perceive. So many people are not self-aware. So many leaders in particular, and in fact, every year, people, you would be amazed at the number of people that get fired because of the way they drove other coworkers crazy, or they had a quirk in their personality, or they were overbearing, or they were micromanagers. They never saw it. They never thought about it because they never really sat down and had a brutal, hard look at their own life and their own skill and their own abilities. Being self-aware is absolutely critical. If your story is going to connect with other people, it has to accurately reflect who you are and what your life is like. So, number one, think in terms of being self-aware. How do you do it? First of all, real quickly, you just start asking people. Start asking people, how am I good at this? Am I bad at this? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Understand those. Get feedback from other people who are close to you and people you respect. That's incredibly important. Those keys will help you become more self-aware so that when you do tell a story, this is why I think comedians can be so funny, because they have a really accurate understanding of their shortcomings, their weaknesses, and they exploit that on the stage. Stand-up comedians are brilliant at exploiting that on the stage. So, number one, self-awareness. Accurate self-awareness is absolutely critical to being a great storyteller. Number two, keep it short. Keep it short. I think that in this cluttered, distracted world we live in today, we're being pulled in so many directions. We need to think in terms of being short. People just don't have the time. They're not going to listen to your whole life story. So figure a way to condense it and keep that story compact. I've talked about before the opera singer who said, make sure you've stopped singing before the audience stops listening. Same is true with storytelling. Make sure you've stopped talking before your person that you're talking to has stopped listening. It's incredibly important. Keep it short. I read a study about a year or two ago that now, because we're being pulled in so many directions and so distracted, that when you meet someone for the first time, you decide what you think of that person in the first 4 to 8 seconds. Now, think about that for a minute. You haven't had time to really get to know that person. You haven't had time to learn anything about that person. But because we're being pulled in so many directions, we have so many options, so many things to do, so many distractions, that we've just kind of decided that we're going to change our behavior and make decisions before we actually know anything about what we're deciding. So in that world where people are making decisions, and it's funny, when we consult with organizations, I always tell people in a 4 to 8 second world, what is your life like? Pastors, in an 8 second world, what does your lobby look like? I'm glad your sermons are great. I'm glad your worship service is fantastic. But in an 8 second world, people are deciding when they walk in the door. Your business is the same way. Your business card, your website. So many areas of our life where we need to think in terms of that 8 second rule. If people are deciding and making decisions in 8 seconds, we need to keep it short. So your rambling story is just not going to work in an 8 second world. It's just not going to work. So learn to keep it short. The third thing, and this will help you do that, is number 3 is practice. Practice it. You know what? It's not about being fake. You're not rehearsing a fake story. You're trying to get that story short, to the point, and develop it so that it works. I mean, this is why novelists and writers spend months and months and months crafting their stories to make sure it's the most efficient way to tell the story, the most powerfully moving story, the most emotional they can get it. You want to practice. So this idea of someone asking you about this event that happened in your life, this rambling, just going on, disjointed story, is just not going to connect with people. So my advice is to get somewhere by yourself, maybe a bedroom, your office, a city park, somewhere where you can shut the door or get away from people and just practice. And practice out loud. Don't just practice writing it down or practice in your head. Practice telling your story. Because once you get comfortable doing that, with practice, you'll always be ready. The New Testament talks about being ready in season and out of season. You never know when somebody's going to ask you, well, Bob, Susan, tell me about your life. Tell me about that incident in college. Tell me about that situation on your first job, or what happened when you got fired. I got fired at 36 years old, so I have a story wrapped up and to encourage people about what happens when they get fired. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I love telling the story about how I got fired because it opened a door that I might never have gone through had I not experienced that situation. So practice. You have to learn to tell your story effectively, make it to the point, make it something that people want to ask for more. Always leave your audience asking for more. It's absolutely critical. And trust me, when it comes to tell your story, now is the time to get it right. So 3 things that I think are incredibly important. Number 1, be self-aware. Let's review. Be self-aware. Have an accurate appraisal of who you are, what your gifts, your ability, your talents, your personality. Take a personality test if you need to, a Myers-Briggs or a DISC profile or Strengths Finders. Find out who you are and what you're about. And work. This is not a one-time thing. This is something you're constantly asking yourself throughout your life and career. Am I self-aware? Do I accurately know what I'm good at, what I'm not very good at? I had a screenplay, a person sent me a screenplay the other day and had a note on there, Phil, I'm just so passionate about writing. I just love writing. I really feel like it's my calling in life. And I read it, and she was awful. It was a terrible, terrible screenplay. And it wasn't just me. I showed it to some other people who agreed. Obviously, this writer does not have a good sense of self-awareness. She doesn't know that she's not. Now, maybe she'll be a great writer someday. But she's pretty convinced she's a great writer now, and she's not. Self-awareness really matters. And the second thing is keep it short, to the point, hone it. In a world of 30-second TV spots and commercials that are now being reduced to 10 seconds or less, we need to be really, really good at telling our story, keeping it short. And trust me, it can still be very, very powerful. The Gettysburg Address is one of the shortest speeches ever done in history, and yet it's incredibly, incredibly short. I remember a great quote, one of my favorite quotes from Mark Twain is, he was asked to do a speech, and his response was, if you want me to talk for an hour, I can do it now. But if you want me to talk for 10 minutes, it'll take me 2 weeks to prepare. I totally agree that the shorter it is, the harder it is to prepare, but it can still be powerful and compelling. And the third thing is practice. Please, that moment when somebody asks you your story, don't leave it to chance. Don't leave it to a random moment where you just kind of quick think off the top of your head what I should tell them. Have a story prepared. Have multiple stories prepared. Think about how you could do it, because whether you're a Christian and you're trying to share your faith with somebody, whether it's a career moment, whether it's just an encouragement moment for somebody who's been beaten down and you have the opportunity to raise them up and help them, let me tell you, don't leave that to chance. Tell your story, practice it, make sure it's the most effective story possible. 3 keys, and if you practice those 3 keys, I think it'll transform the way you tell stories. And honestly, as a leader, the way you tell stories could be the single greatest way to show your leadership. After all, you study the life of Jesus. You find out Jesus didn't leave a book about theology. He didn't leave a book about church leadership or about doctrine. Jesus pretty much told stories. But they were powerful, powerful stories that had a huge impact on people's lives. So never forget, your ability to tell a compelling story could be the key to becoming a better leader. So I'm Phil Cook. Come join me at my blog at philcook.com, Philcooke. Love to talk to you there about how these kind of subjects and these issues can impact your leadership skills, particularly if you lead creative people or if you want to be a creative leader yourself. Philcook.com. I'd love for you to come and visit, and I will see you there.